everyone. Welcome to Blue Star Rising, Templar Awakening. Today is November 15th, and this is Michael Henry Dunn here with my highly esteemed friend, Reverend Maia Nartoomid. How are you today, Maia?
Hi, well, I'm here and I'm going.
Okay, well, that'll be good enough, I guess. I always find myself, well, let's say always, but pretty often, find myself opening our programs by saying, ladies and gentlemen, here at Blue Star Rising, we go into depth on complex, profound, and sometimes bewilderingly sophisticated and deep metaphysical journeys. And today is no exception. So the Ranna Time Wave and the Kali Rift are the subject of today's program. And I've heard you speak about these in the past, and our dear late friend, well, he's not our late friend, he's Bill Bueller. Anyway, dear Bill used to also, share with me the story of the Ranna Time Wave, which, let's note it up front, is not a timeline. We hear a lot about timelines these days, and that the Ranna Time Wave is essentially the true and higher flow of time within divine order. And there was a rift that took place to create our fractured timeline. So we have a amazing video to share with you on this. It touches on, just to let you know, in terms of what's happening now, November 2020, it touches on the story of Atlantis, how those waves from that event, from that time tsunami that took place with the fall of Atlantis, how those are still rolling on, and how we are acting out and possibly correcting and coming into realignment from some of the negative consequences of what was attempted at that time and what the consequences were. So that's my thumbnail sketch of my somewhat limited understanding, because it's got a lot of fascinating questions to it. So Maya, do you want to just share a little bit more about what we're about to see?
Well, it's pretty comprehensive into itself. In the video, I went into some areas that could get a little complex, but I wanted to allow people to understand, again, always from the Thothic perspective, that what we are experiencing now on planet Earth, the whole picture, is very much attendant to things that have happened in the past. Yes, we create our futures, and we choose our life flow, and we're not slaves to it. But at the same time, if we don't understand our past, and at least understand that there is a past that affects us deeply, then we really can't liberate ourselves from that and move forward. Now, the story that's told in the video, it's not like everybody has to know that story or believe it or anything, but it does give you an insight from the Thothic view of how something like that can affect ripples in time and create whole new reality streams. So that said, I think it's time to watch the video.
All right. So it's about 20 minutes long, and as always, well worth your attention. And we will be right here, ready to go into some fascinating exploration of it. So here is the Ranna Time Wave and the Kali Rift, and we'll be right back with you.
I'm going to be reading and commenting on various information that I received on what Thoth calls the Kali Rift and the Ranna Time Wave. This goes back as far as the 1980s and as recent as around 2006. We begin with the older texts here. The Ranna is the true flow of time in this universe. The earth and other worlds are created as a path for karmic resolution to prevent certain forces from building within the sacred trinity of Pleiades, Sirius, and Orion, whereby the pure thresholds of light might become violated in time. These worlds, including the earth, are created within a parallel construct of the Ranna time wave flow, but still aligned to it. Once the earth had been created, further karmic forces built, and eventually the earth fractured away from its parallel track within the Ranna time wave, and the Kali Rift was formed. This is actually a fracture in the Earth's time grid, or flow, that was created as a result of interdimensional implosions which happened sequentially in a linear construct, but simultaneously in a true perspective of the sphere of time. In other words, as a result of sentient will pursuing its own course of action as a separate focus from that of the true time grid consciousness of the Ranna time wave, certain occurrences came together in Earth's time construct as a synchronous event to cause a fracture of true time in our reality, thus creating the Kali Rift. So the Kali Rift is the gap that exists between our true time flow and where we currently reside in the time continuum. Now I wish to comment on this further. When speaking of the Ranna time wave, this is not a timeline. This is a waveform. Timelines are generated through the excitation of energies within the Ranna time flow. In other words, the flow creates a waveform, and that waveform sends out ripples, shall we say, and in doing so, timelines start forming, but they can only form because they're coming from sentient realms, sentient energy, a thinking kind of modality. Maybe not always thinking like we think of thinking, but it is a flow of awareness on some level. Even if the awareness is highly stunted at times, it is still a form of awareness. So if the timelines are in sync with the Ranna flow, then they are variables that have a complete form. They have a beginning, a middle, and I'm not going to say end, but a continuum involved. But if they are not in sync with that, they are fractured. They are a dead end, basically. They have to eventually disintegrate and either become whole or create another fractured reality, which that causes those warped cycles, that we tend to call karma, that go back and forth and just keep creating more of what, it is in the first place, which is incomplete. And now we move to some other transmissions from Thoth on this, which have to do with the understanding of truth and how it aligns to the Ranna time flow, the Kali Rift, and all of that. Truth has one harmony, one tone. If we tell you that a certain event occurred in a certain year thousands of years ago, this is so. However, there are souls which simply do not identify with that truth. They come from a consciousness level that does not envelop it. Therefore, they will not be attracted to it. They will not channel it. They will not accept its karma or its grace. So I'm going to pause here. He's identifying how certain alternate timelines are created, which are basically fractured. There are degrees of fracture, okay? There are some that are really, really fractured, and there are others that are just saying, nah, I'm not going to go that way. But if they're not accepting the truest potential of a particular timeline, so they veer away from it, they're setting themselves up for losing the fullest potential of their reality. Thoth has also spoken of the first and second and third millenniums. Now, this can be confusing because he's not referring to our linear 100 years. This is some higher time count, and I've never really explored it fully with him. But suffice to say that when he's speaking of this, he's talking about different connections, synchronicities with the Ranna time flow. The first reality, the first millennium, was one that aligned fully with that flow. The second was a half-light, an orotronic split from that. It's not a fractured timeline in the truest sense of the word, because it has some kind of a momentum to go somewhere. And where it's going is to evolve back to the full flow. So that takes it to the third millennium, which is the return to light, the homeward light, coming back into the full metatronic flow. So Thoth refers to the Kali Rift and the Ranna time wave, defining the Kali Rift as a tear in Earth's time realities caused by several points in time centering in the Atlantean epoch, but multi-synchronous in various other periods. The Ranna time wave is the undefiled wave or flow of Earth time. The graphic that you are seeing here, which was created by William Buehler, based on my information from Thoth concerning it, perhaps gives you somewhat of a picture of how all of this works. But it is, I'll admit, rather dimensional and complicated because we tend to think all in linear thought forms, and this is far beyond linear, although it does include it. It was during the Atlantean period that the time rift caused the actual tear, creating the need for the second millennium separation, which actually materialized at the crucifixion of Christ. And so it occurred in an interdimensional form during the Atlantean period, but didn't break out into the linear time flow until the crucifixion of Christ. The Kali time rift occurred as a result of multiple infractions along the Ranna time wave. These infractions were generated at specific points in Earth's space-time reality due to karmic actions of its sentient beings. While these points of interference occurred multiply in time, i.e., Mars War, Ark scenario at Mount Sinai, Bannock Hill, etc., he's referring to things he's referred to before as places where it erupted. There was only one point of discharge in the Earth's time wave, and that was at the moment of Ruta's ascension in the Atlantean epoch. Now, if you'll recall, Ruta is the Isle of Atlantis. They actually ascended when everything else sank. That's a complex story, so I won't go into it here. This is where the actual tear was made in time. Understand that while at other points in time anomalies developed as a result of the tear that created the rifting is in the Atlantean frame. Here we will relate to you exactly what took place in Atlantis to cause it to become the field of exegesis for the Kali dynamic. As you know, during that time in Atlantis, there were many scientific endeavors occurring that were against divine order. They were varied from experimentations of genetic manipulation, much like the Nephilim ancestors conducted, translate that to the Anunnaki, to attempting time travel by warping magnetic fields. One group of scientists succeeded in entering the Ranna time wave, seeking to attach the present Atlantean time to a past from which metatronic energy fields could be brought forward to infuse the retarded Atlantean genetic strain. You have heard us refer to the pure-born as being the last vestiges of full light engendered genetics among the Atlantean race. But the scientists of Baal could not successfully utilize their genetics for the purpose of revitalizing the distorted genes. They needed the quality of this energy to be from a more intense, even purer source. Thus, turning to the ancient texts of the Nephilim, Aka, Anunnaki, at least in this context, they sought to reach back through the portals of time to grasp the magic ring of eternal life. To shorten a long and complex story, the Baal sent one man through the unstable time tunnel they managed to create with the objective of simply touching a sphere of light. This sphere was located in the very ancient past within the chambers of the city of Lords on Mars. They knew from the texts that this sphere would give them the access they needed if they could penetrate the time lock or telemark around it, and if a living biological system within the right amount of active metatronic resonance were to touch the globe. This entity would have to be pure-born of a high degree. Most pure-born would know better than to consent to such a project, even though it would mean the light redemption of their race temporarily. In the long run, the karmic implications would destroy any good gained by the immediate benefit of the transference. The sphere the pure-born was sent to encounter is called a hypotetra. It was also called a modos, which was a more ancient name. It could be seen as the jewel in the lotus, as it amplifies the sum of its parts, or those forms given identification in its parts, sending them in a tandem of mass identical patterning throughout the whole of the identified structure. This is difficult to explain in simpler terms. As an analogy, suppose a child were to be coloring in a coloring book. The white page with the black outline she is coloring within, in this context, the identified structure. As she colors the picture, she is locking with sentient intent onto changing its form. If the crayon were the hypotetra, when she pressed down with her intent through her physical body on the crayon, it would press upon the paper inside the form and release a pattern of that intent identically throughout the form, i.e. the picture. She would not have to rub the crayon over the entire form to elicit this result. She would quantize the package of intent, combined with original single activation through time. Another analogy would be to press the shade command on a computer to replicate that shade throughout the identified area. However, in both analogies, an element is missing, that which is the intensification of the essential charge or signal throughout this replication. Now we return to the pure-born Atlantean time traveler. We will not go into detail as to how they achieved it, but the Baal managed to subvert the telemax surrounding the sphere. The pure-born reached to touch the sphere. The intent was to replicate the pattern of full metatronic light throughout his genetic system. Since his system had been pre-matched via computer to the warped Atlantean genetics, in theory, his touching the sphere should have triggered a nova of metatronic transformation within that strain in the time frame from whence he came. However, that was not the outcome they achieved. The telemac had been overcome by creating a magnetic illusion that told it the intruder was actually a part of its own system, and as such, of course, the pure-born thief was able to get through the protection field unimpeded. But what the Baal did not realize was that the sphere would not accept tactile contact with its own kind. This was a built-in command to ensure that one hypotetra could not lock in and transfer power to another hypotetra, which could eventually cause, very simply, an overload within the Metatron as it intensified and replicated its own power through kindred association. Such manipulation of these spheres would have allowed entities to switch back and forth rare grades of itons and create power blocks within the time grid. We won't attempt to explain all this, but just say that such an intrusion would escalate the already unstable time wave considerably. Thus, when the pure-born touched the sphere, he only went as far as to touch the outer infrashield and not the sphere itself. At this point, I'm choosing not to go further in this explanation, as it is really difficult to understand. It's not very linear, and it has a lot of components to it. So I will say this, that these individuals, including the individual who touched the sphere, were trying to correct something. They were good people trying to correct something, but it went terribly wrong. They just didn't factor in everything, and they made a big mistake. In fact, what they were trying to correct were things that had been disrupted by previous persons in this Baal group, but not them. They were saying, look, we need to correct this. These persons in the past that were part of this whole experimental project were not in integrity in doing what they did. We don't condone that, and we're trying to correct it. But it kind of just didn't happen. I guess the karma was already accelerated so fully that it was not to be. And so what was created instead, Thoth usually refers to as a time tsunami, but here he calls it a paradox tsunami. And this focused multiple infractions into one concentrated point of implosion. There is much to consider in understanding this paradox and the resultant phenomena, but basically what the young man had done in wrongly attempting access into the sphere was to make it impossible for his dharma to lead him to the future life in which he enters the sphere through divine concordance. So this is alluding to the complicated part that I didn't read, but he was making a correction in a future life, but it caused a paradox there. It's just a long story. In conclusion, let us look at this from the perspective of November 2020 and all that is going on in the world today that is so dramatic, divisive, and transformative. We have come to a point where we are moving back toward the light, back toward the Ranna Time Flow, which takes us into what Thoth calls the third millennium, which is the platform, the stage, the setting in time to escort us into the new Earth Star consciousness. And in doing so, there are all kinds of misalignments that have to come to the surface and be addressed. And this is a challenge, and it is not an easy time, and it is not going to be a brief time, unfortunately. But within the context of that experience, we are forming deeper bonds with our spiritual allies, both here on the planet and in other dimensions, in the inner earth, the star beings, but also the spiritual allies of ourself, the parts of ourself that have been scattered through time and space, other dimensions, that are joining us now, that awareness factor that brings all of our being into a coherent stream. And unfortunately, that doesn't include everyone on the planet because of their own choices. But we must focus on where the light lives in this experience and how we can engender that light and bring it forth as a true flame of the heart that is a full light spectrum, not half light, unifying, simplifying, and redirecting consciousness to what Thoth calls the homeward light.
All right, welcome back. And so I'm really glad the way at the end there, Maya, you just brought it back to November 2020 and said, here's how this is affecting us. Here is what we are in the flow of realigning from this, very, very long arc of history. And I think the connection to the time tsunami of Atlantis is particularly compelling and interesting. And it struck me as I was watching it that, we all know the myth of Atlantis. I mean, there's Plato, he tells us about it, and there have been recent archaeological discoveries of a place off of Gibraltar where there's undersea features that correspond actually to Plato's description of Atlantis. But then there is the bigger story that channeled material and myths and legends that have come down from humanity, the common archaeological record, geological record indicating that there was a vast inundation about 12, 13,000 years ago, and that there was something went horribly wrong with an attempt to manipulate divine law in a way that was not in alignment with divine order. And we find this in a lot of myths and legends. And it struck me as I was listening that this has a particular direct connection to the way the story of Atlantis, the inundation, the flood, the way that connects to the underlying mythology of J.R.R. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings and the lost Isle of Numenor, and that there was a highly evolved spiritual civilization that attempted to steal the secret to eternal life. That's what Tolkien says, that they basically attempted to storm the Blessed Isle to take from the Valar, who were the reigning deities, the secret to eternal life, and that this caused a time rift. He literally says that they removed. This is all quite specific, and since Lord of the Rings is the most popular book of all time next to the Bible, it just struck me as a good jumping off point for this, because we have an attempt to misuse divine technology, well-intentioned, but nevertheless, which caused a rift in time. I mean, Tolkien actually literally says that the Blessed Isle was removed from the circles of the world.
Wow. See, I'm not a Tolkien person. I mean, I respect and I've seen, years ago, saw some of the movies, never read the books. So what you're telling me is brand new to me. I've never heard this.
Yeah, well, it's not, brought forward so much it's not in The Hobbit at all. In Lord of the Rings, it's touched on here and there. And then if you go to the appendix, it's brought forward more specifically. There was, Tolkien himself had a recurring nightmare his whole life, from the time he was a boy, of an enormous wave 1,000 feet high coming over the Greenlands. All his life he had this nightmare. So it, we can speculate that may have been part of his soul experience, and he actually puts it into Lord of the Rings in the third book. One of the characters talks about having this nightmarish vision. Anyway, so the whole concept of there being a divine flow of time, the Ranna time wave, and that through a karmically caused misuse, that the Kali rift was essentially created by us, by human consciousness, and that timelines then began to flow from that. So can we go into that just like in a little more detail, in terms of how, first of all, I'm fascinated by how it can be realigned, how, what's taking place right now to put us back in alignment. Maybe that's a good place to jump off, or wherever. I'm just offering some thoughts.
Sure. What's going on now? Well, a lot of things. Mainly, you see, the Ranna time wave is not really, he addresses it as a time wave so we can understand its connection to timelines, that there's a connection. But the Ranna wave, if we just leave out the word time, really doesn't have anything to do with linear time, with the ticking of a clock or sequencing of things. What it does, it's a wave of harmonizing consciousness to flow in a synchronistic pattern. So if you adjust your consciousness to that synchronistic pattern, and you're in a physical reality with gravity and space and time, then your timelines are going to have that synchronicity with the divine flow. So that's why he included the word time, Ranna time wave, so we'd understand that there is a connection. So let's see, what else were you asking? You asked
well,
a lot.
what you're just saying now puts me in mind of, for example, with meditation, which can certainly be thought of, I would think, as a way of putting oneself in alignment with the divine flow,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we'll call it the Ranna time wave. And that if you start the morning that way, the timeline of your day is going to unfold differently than it would have had you not meditated.
Mm-hmm.
Because you put yourself in alignment with the divine flow. It doesn't mean that everything is going to go hunky-dory. You still live on planet Earth. There's still duality and karma and, lots of life. But, what I've understood and learned from some of the great yogis on the path that I follow of self-realization fellowship and the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, that when you begin the day that way, you put yourself in the divine flow, you come out of a blissful meditation, you go, I'm in alignment now, all is well. And then you go out the door, where your karma is waiting for you, the planet's waiting for you. And it doesn't mean that everything's going to be hunky-dory. But, if we stay as much as we can in that conscious alignment, we can be guided to take that flow, to be in that timeline that leads most smoothly to our spiritual evolution, our unfoldment, our maturity, our greater inner peace and joy, while we're dealing with the fact that, hey, we chose this assignment, we're on the planet, and now we are giving ourselves the best opportunity to, be in alignment with the Ranna time wave. Does that make sense? Does this sort of in line with what you're addressing?
It does. Some things I wanted to kind of bring up here at this moment is, okay, first of all, when the time tsunami hit, several things took place. One is it evaporated most of the ice canopy. Remember, we talked about that on another show. So that
Yeah.
caused the flooding thing, or part of the flooding thing. Of course, the magnetic energies. And then, as I understand it, because we're dealing with nearly 54 years of my writings and work now. And so I don't always remember exactly what I wrote and what was given to me a zillion years ago. But as I remember, I think that is when the one of the moons, Thoth swears for a period of time, there were two moons. And one of the moons just to, bought the farm. And that it was, I think it was during the tsunami, but I'm not sure. And then the pieces fell. Something fell from the sky during the tsunami. Was it a meteor? Was it the moon? I think it wasn't the moon, but maybe. But anyway, there's a lot going on. That's the point. A lot of things happened, and so Noah was trying to get out of Dodge before this all hit. Because the actual Noah, was way back there, and the biblical version has put him in his own little category. But and he had several ships, not just one, and he wasn't carrying a bunch of animals 2 by 2. He was carrying genetic material, and a few other things. But anyway, when the tsunami hit, Noah literally, the ships just went into another time field. And they wound up in the future, several thousand years later. Was it 1,000? Yeah, I think it was. So when they got on Mount Ararat and the other places, because all the boats didn't wind up on Ararat, but in the surrounding areas, it was later in time. It was, closer to our time. I know that sounds wild, but you know what? Years and years later, I opened the Keys of Enoch book, because I've never read it from cover to cover, but someone gave it to me long ago because they said, wow, this really sounds like what's being written in this book I have, and they gave me this book. And so every once in a while I'll open it and just see what I get. And in there I saw something that Hertak channeled or received, and I can't quote it exactly, but it said something about Noah's Ark lifting up. And I thought, oh, shoot, there it is. He didn't go into all the things that Thoth said, but I mean, it definitely, to me, an indication. He said, oh, it raised up, So that's one thing that happened. And the other is that the actual point where the time tsunami, like 0 point, I guess you could say, is at, is it Finnegan's? Okay, I can't say the name. It's off the coast of Iona. Help me out, Michael. That little cave. It starts with an F.
A little
Fingal's Cave.
Fingal's Cave. Okay.
Yeah, Fingal's Cave next to Iona, and it has those unusual geometric rock
Oh,
formation.
right. That's actually Scotland. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, right.
it's quite close to Ireland, actually, but it's properly speaking, it is Scotland.
Yes, and so that's the point, the 0 point. Now, those rock formations can be found all over the world, of course, and various things cause them. But Thoth has said that wherever you find those rock formations, there is some kind of a specific and rather sudden magnetic anomaly involved. That's his words, not geologists. They would probably be tearing their hair out at that, but that's what Thoth says. So the Fingal's Cave one obviously had some pretty interesting energies going on there. Whether it caused all of those formations or not, I don't know. But that is the point, that he says that it all took place. And I've always wanted to visit there, but of course that's not in the cards.
Well, you never know. There is also a similar cave with a similar formation in Portugal, near a Templar chapel that was built upon the site of a previous temple to the goddess. And the cave, the shape of the cave bears, as I recall, a pretty striking resemblance to Fingal's Cave, and moreover is, apparently naturally shaped in a feminine shape. It's the yoni. It's, it is literally the womb. And so they speculate that's why this particular place in Portugal, up in the mountains where this beautiful Templar chapel has been for, 800-900 years, it was originally a cave sacred to the divine feminine. And of course, the Templars, with their devotion to Mary Magdalene, and that's the Isis tradition as well, that ties into that. And so what you're saying is that, now, of course, yes, there are all kinds of natural formations, but at these, particularly if it's these particular sacred sites, that people have felt this higher vibration when they go to these places, that this was the result of a specific magnetic anomaly that was a result of the time tsunami?
Well, in the case of Fingal's Cave, yes, I would say that it was very much a part of that. Not in all the other locations, but in the other locations, there had to be, he's saying, wherever you find that kind of rock formation, there's been something, maybe not that dramatic, but something of an anomaly that has taken place at some point in time that's caused that to develop, in that way, or caused that. See, the thing of it is, this is from the Thothic perspective, but we can't really definitively say, well, we've examined these stones over here and we've taken carbon dating. I don't know if carbon dating with stones, but we've done, the rocks and stones, and we've determined that they're so many years old because here's the strata and this happened here. To an extent, that's true. But when there's so many anomalies that have occurred with this planet, time anomalies of one type or another. And that was the big tsunami, okay? But there, little fractional time changes and things all the way along. So he says, you can't say with absolute certainty that a particular thing, rock, whatever, is such and such years old. Because if it happened to be exposed or be a part of one of these anomalies, forget it. You could say, oh, well, this is 500 years old. It could be 5 million years old, or vice versa, because you can't categorize it from that kind of linear, science.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that most of it is accurate, but it's just that, there are periods that you cannot qualify like that.
Well, this is fascinating to me because you read about a lot of instances where there is a geologic anomaly, where something turns up where it absolutely has no business being, right? And paleontologists also, have to deal with this, where they'll find a footprint or a bone or something that, at a place in the geological timeline where it has absolutely no business being, and to accept it simply fractures everything, turns their entire field topsy-turvy. And so it's just sort of like, we're just gonna brush it under here, because everybody, if I even bring it up, people will think I'm crazy and I'll lose my tenure and I'll lose my position and I won't get my funding.
Exactly.
So it's works,
addressed that actually in some article I wrote years ago. He addressed the fingerprints, the footprints, things like that. And he said there's two reasons for that. It could be one of two things. One, some ancient alien being actually walked there 5 million years ago, because we don't, or he said in some instances it got wrapped up in the time thing and it was, deposited there. So there's two different scenarios it could be, one or the other. A lot of these.
This brings up another thing you just mentioned. We were talking about the flood and Noah in the biblical account, and how there was a time fracture, and they had this genetic material, like 2 by 2 the animals go, to preserve them, and suddenly, boom, the ship ends up on Mount Ararat, 1,000 years later, 2,000 years later, whatever. The biblical story of Noah and the biblical chronology, that you go to, I forget which part of the Bible it is, where it's the begats, so and so begat so and so, and so and so begat so and so, and in the age of Noah lived to 900 years old, and Shem lived to 800 years old, and on it goes. Well, it is a accepted fact that the biblical telling of the flood derives from the Epic of Gilgamesh, derives from a much earlier legend and story. And in some cases, it's identical passages.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, and that kind of fractures the biblical timeline.
It does.
Right? So I don't know how this plays into, the story. I mean, to me, it feels like that is an instance where it's a retelling of an oral tradition that has come down from the event, and it's simply, retold within the context of Judaism, of the Israelites, and so found its way into the Old Testament. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah, in one of my Temple Doors issues, which is back in the 1980s and early 90s, there's a whole huge article on Gilgamesh, the connections, whatever, from the Thothic perspective. And I can't remember most of it right now to quote any of it, but I found it very interesting at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was very dimensional, of course. Thoth always gives these dimensional layers to everything,
Right. Yeah. I remember, you said, conversations with Bill Bueller, and he'd talk about these layers in history where he'd say, well, that's a different timeline, and actually that could change tomorrow, that layer of evidence indicating that this followed this linear time, which I love. He said, that could all change because the timelines are reshaping as we speak. You could go back next week and there'd be a different layer of evidence there.
I know,
yeah. No, please. I can't handle that. The Cubs won the World Series in 2016.
Well, that goes up to the, oh gosh, what do they call it? The Mandela effect. We won't go into that right now, but everybody's familiar with it. Yeah, these things happen. I mean, but the main thing, usually though, we're blessed with not really realizing that it's changed, because to us, it's always been that way. But these aren't changes that are immense. They're little things,
Right. Yeah. So, go ahead.
No, that's about it.
All right. Well, it strikes me that the main thing to focus on here, you're telling of the moment when the pure soul being is trying to correct something that had been misaligned previously in someone else's attempt, and they thought they could reach through and touch this sacred power center or place, and that they miscalculated, made a mistake, as you say, a big mistake. Like a really big mistake. It's like, I'm reminded of movies where they're trying to stop some nuclear device from exploding, and they're like undersea. It's like, don't touch the red wire to the blue wire. It's like red wire number 32 to blue wire number 31.
What if they were colorblind?
There'll be a nuclear explosion that'll destroy the world. So just be very careful.
Let me get my color glasses on first.
Yeah. I was like, okay, yeah. Anyway, it's sort of like that. And let me understand, because it was a little unclear to me.
Yeah.
This was not a Nephilim Anunnaki project that went wrong. They were trying to correct something that the Anunnaki had done?
Well, not Anunnaki. This didn't have anything to do with Anunnaki. The Atlanteans do mess up stuff on their own.
Okay.
I don't know all the details of the original Baal project, but it was to mess things up, mess things up. By that I mean through their own agendas. Just like they were very Anunnaki minded, but they weren't Anunnakis. The Anunnakis
Right.
played one role, an important role, but one role in this bigger picture. There were Nephilim doing this and this and that, and they were Anunnakis, and then there were the Atlanteans, and everybody was trying to mess things up. So, but with the Atlanteans, this particular group, the Baal, had their own agenda of maybe creating super races. That super race thing's been going on this planet a long time. And so what they wanted was, to do this for their own gratification, for their own reasons, whatever, and it messed things up so badly. And, Edgar Casey, I believe, talks about them. And I'm not, in depth reader of Edgar Casey, but certainly I respect his material greatly. But it seems to me, he talked about, they experimented and they wound up with people with heads of donkeys and stuff. They were doing horrible genetic experience, and it had nothing to do with the Anunnaki. And so this particular group of Atlanteans that the Pureborn were involved with, they were good guys, and they were saying, okay, we've weeded out all the bad Baal beings people in our organization. We got a new organization going here. We're true scientists, spiritual beings. We're gonna clean up. We're gonna fix this. And so that's what they thought they were doing. But they were also desperate at that point. It's not like they just immediately decided, hey, I know what we'll do. It wasn't like that. It was like there was a real desperation to correct this problem. I don't know the whole story. It could probably be like 6 volumes of all of the stuff that was going on. But they were like at the end of their rope. That's the way they felt for the whole humanity. And they were not really in touch with some of the star beings they should have been in touch with. Why? I don't know. A lot of pieces missing here that Mai doesn't know about. But the desperation I do know about. And that caused them to make a big mistake. Desperation is not a good way to start on a very sensitive project. And
Right.
that's what
Yeah.
led to the problem. But the good soul that actually touched the thing and messed it up, but he was trying, he was a brave person to be the one to be sent in there. I mean, that could have been really bad for him. In fact, some ways it was. In a future life, he went back to try to correct that in a very positive way. But unfortunately, that created a paradox. It's just I left that part out because it was so involved that I didn't want to get into it, and I won't now. But the bottom line of all of this, because I know it all sounds like science fiction, but then so does what we're living right now. Who could make this stuff up?
Right.
What we're living right
Yeah.
now. Oh, that would never happen. So anyway, where was I? Oh, so the energy and effort that was put into that, reverberates through time. And what we're experiencing now on the planet is so similar. I'm not saying it was all caused, that our present is caused entirely from that. No, but it did create the tsunami, which separated and divided these time streams. And yes, from that perspective, it did create what's going on now. But there's so much more to it than that. In fact, I just wrote an article, and I put it up there because on Tribe Light Station, I've posted it just about everywhere on my social media. And I think it's, what did I name it? The Ancients, the Dark and the Light, or something like that. And I was inspired to do it just suddenly. And it's my part is very short because I found this video and I was watching it the other night that I was so enamored with. I mean, it just brought up a lot of feelings in me from, connecting me to my life stream and why I'm here now in this incarnation doing the work I do, which is, my own stuff. But that's what motivated me to look deeper into it and go to Thoth and, and look at it. So I embedded that video, but I also wrote this and I asked for Thoth to help me, understand these things. And he spoke about, this is the first time he's used this word. Of course, this is a Thoth word. He makes this stuff up, right? I mean, the words. He makes the words up because we need words to, figure things out. So the word he made up here was Genetica, genetics, Genetica. And he said, because he's referred to it before, but he's never given it a name. But it is the higher cosmic genetics. It's the higher DNA. It's a higher holograph of what we receive through our DNA. Our DNA is a picture of this higher program of light. Okay, and so now he's calling it Genetica. And how does the Genetica communicate and work through the genetics? Through paragenetics, which is, of course, was given to me in 1976 or something. Paragenetics. So through paragenetics, receives the doctrine from the commands from the Genetica template program and enters it into our DNA, into our genetic field. Now, I'm not going to go all into paragenetics again. We really ought to do a show just on that sometime. But
Yeah.
the point is, and we kind of circle around here, is that our genetics that we have in our bodies now is a product of two main streams. One is the stuff the Anunnaki did. And of course, the Atlantean stuff is in there, but it's minor because they didn't, get their whole program in there. It's minor compared to what the Anunnaki did to us. And there's other Nephilim things that fooled around with us at different times. But again, the Anunnaki did the biggest damage. And then the other stream are the sun lords, the sun beings, the star beings, he calls them, that are our kindred. And they are the ones that shine the brightest in our field. They're the reason we're here on planet Earth. They're the reason that Earth is here on this node in space-time. They are our mentors, our support, our comforters. They aren't God. God is our eternal spirit connection to divine streaming, but they are, the servants of that in a very immediate and divine way. So they are here. They came and they brought us into they brought us into spiritual presence with this planet. They didn't decide for us to go down the beanstalk and become so materially enmeshed. That was our thought, and we had our own free will. But they were part of the creation of the original program of light that engendered us to be here. So they're the most powerful presence in our field. But we also have what the Anunnaki did to us to create a slave nation for them. And there are all kinds of aspects of that, that are so deeply ingrained into the psyche of our lower natures. So right now on the planet, we are having a real war between those two genetic strains within humanity. And it's not separated out and say, oh, well, you're the Anunnaki and I'm the Sun Lords. No, it's all in us, all of us, So it's up to the individual which stream they choose to embrace and which stream they choose to utterly reject. And right now we can see how that's going. It is what it is.
Well, this has a number of corollaries that are, first of all, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Sun Lords stream genetically within us proceeds from Melchizedek arriving back on the planet, the heaven houses, where it's like, all right, we need to reseed Solarian genetics into humanity to correct what has been done to them. Is that right?
Well, that was a phase of trying to help us out after we came down the lotus stem, is actually what he calls it. See, it was never intended in the program, the initial program, for humanity to come down the lotus stem. They were to stay in the lotus reality, with the earth being this little ball of fabric that was connecting them to this point in time space. So the higher realm was just a little, connection to here. But humanity, our souls from, they went, what would happen if we went, that looks interesting. and so, one thing led to
Yeah.
another. So
Think
now
up
we're
a
down,
body and go
right.
down there.
Now we're down here in Lemuria, okay, and we're going, help. And so they send Melchizedek down to kind of, give us some genetic material and kind of set us up, because you're here, okay, well, let's see what we can do to help you out, That's where that came about, and that's what started, that phase in the whole process.
Well, again, this has a connection to stories that have come down to us, and I like to bring these up because I think it helps all of us make a human connection on a deeper level, a more touching or intimate level, because storytelling is essential to humanity's understanding of itself. And again, I'll just go back briefly to Tolkien, because there is the specific dynamic within the whole big arc of the story, that the blending of elves and humanity, that there are specific unions in the arc of the ages in the telling of the story of Tolkien. There is Luthien Tinuviel and Beren, and then there's Aragorn and Arwen, where the higher elven genetics are seeded back into humanity. And if you go to the Lord of the Rings trilogy in the special editions, you can find Tolkien scholars discussing this and saying that it's J.R.R. Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and this idea of the divine coming into humanity in bodily form, in genetic form, that this is an echo of Christian understanding. Mm-hmm. So there's that. I just wanted to bring that out for my fellow Tolkien geeks, and also just in terms of the essential dynamic that's going on here, of being messed with, of divine order just not being good enough. It's okay, but I've got a better idea. I've got a different agenda. I want to create a super race. I want to, have eternal life. Or like the tall whites are doing, it was like, well, we die, we get too tall when we're 800 and we flop over and die. Let's, mess with human genetics. That's going on, right? And then you got these blended tall white humans who are, I don't know, they might turn out to be good and they might not. Let's hope they do, because they're the hidden puppeteers above the puppeteers for some bad things going on. Anyway, the whole story is just too complex, but it's reminding me of, there's a line in Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda, where he's talking about how long does it take the soul to return to divine union. Cast out into this playground. Okay, we came down the beanstalk, as you're talking about, from the lotus reality down here into, 50,000 years ago in Lemuria, whatever, and started to play around and got stuck in this lower area. Where he's talking about ordinary, natural human evolution takes 1 million years of diseaseless, natural living for the soul, through karma and reincarnation of hundreds of incarnations, to eventually, go back up the ladder of the inner spine to God. However, he says, this period is prolonged because that's just natural, diseaseless evolution, 1 million years. That souls who do not live in accordance with divine alignment, who begin to get their own agendas. And I think I'm pretty good on the exact words here, are that who live in harmony not even with nature, pursuing unnatural complexities and offending in their mind and body the sweet sanities of nature. Right? And it sounds like, I mean, to me, this is a description of this underlying dynamic. You know, I got a better idea. Thanks, God. I mean, that's good, you know, Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, you know, eternal youth, divinely pure reproduction. That's all good, but I got a better idea. You know, that, and that is what the difference between a sustainable economy and an extraction economy. No. I know Mother Earth can sustain us, but we'd much rather rape Mother Earth and, you know, extract from Mother Earth. And so I occasionally just like to step back and, you know, look at these dynamics that that this whole thing has in common. Essentially, how did the Kali rift happen? How did we, you know, how did we depart from the Ranna time wave? Let me ask you, why did you get anything from Thoth about why did he call it the Kali rift? Because of course, you know, Kali as a deity, you know, is the fierce mother of protection and destruction, and you know, there's many cosmological aspects to the nature of Kali. But did you get any sense of why specifically it was called that?
Well, when I was given that, I really, you know, I knew the name. You know, I knew it was an Indian fierce goddess of some kind. You know, I didn't know anything much about her. I still don't, actually. But I don't think Thoth was trying to name it something bad, because Kali isn't really bad, is she?
No, indeed.
That's
Divine
not.
Mother.
Yeah, right. But the idea is that Kali says, enough. I'm separating you from this. You don't deserve it right now. You're going to have to earn it, you know? And I think that's what that was about. The Kali rift is saying, enough, you know? And but what are we doing? We're returning. We're not lost in the box canyon here, at least not yet. We're going back to be reconnected to the Ranna. And this whole process, moving us into the stage for the ascension. I mean, we can't go anywhere until we have gotten reconnected to the Ranna to some degree. You know, there's always degrees of things. So Kali is our instructor. And she's saying, in this instance, and she's saying, I create this rift, this chasm here, because you're not adults enough in the room to handle what's on the other side. You know, basically, that's what that's about. From a scientific standpoint, it's a natural order of things that if you're not gisting with the divine sacred stream, the divine sacred stream goes, enough. And it says, nope, separate, you know.
Right.
Same thing. Now, I wanted to address for a minute two things that you brought up, if I may.
Sure.
One is that Thoth speaks about divine grace. He calls it, what does he call it now? Dispensation, divine dispensation. And with divine dispensation, we don't have to wait that million years. Now, that doesn't mean we get a free ticket, you know, to ride, free ticket to ride. We don't get that. It's not that kind of a thing. It's the consciousness, the awareness that reaches a certain level. And then the beings of light come in and say, okay, we see your future. We see where you can go with this awareness. You may not be there right now, but we can see it. So we're going to step into the picture and give you a certain degree of divine dispensation. Not the whole enchilada, but a certain degree. And that's been given to us. along the way, according to Thoth, there have been divine dispensations given to us. And this brings us back to the violet mandate, Lord Michael. Like it ties into that. We won't go off into that direction right now, but that's all part of the same picture. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And the other has to do with the fairies and the nature spirits and all of that. They there's a high Davic level, Deva, Aka, nature beings, that never descended from the lotus. And then they have the nature elements that did along with us, because we're all kind of connected, and they came and, involved with us and whatever. So the ones that are still in the lotus are holding the greater template that allows us to become a newer star. Because we've got to have this higher Deva energy. The Devas that are with us here, down here, they're perfectly fine, most of it, not all of it, but it's not, they're sort of struggling with it like we are. In its own way, of course, not really like we are, but it's not complete. It's not complete, it's half-light. So the other factor of this is that much of humanity, I won't say all, but much of humanity has, everybody on the planet, not everybody, many people on the planet have a certain amount of fairy genetics. I'm going to call it fairies, okay? Fairy genetics. Because there was so much interactive goings on in the early times when certain humans could go beyond the veil, like the, okay, it's coming to me. the she, the she, and mixing with
truth is none.
Huh?
The truth is none.
There we are. Yeah, that's what I was looking
for. The truth is none.
Yeah.
Right, my people.
So there was a lot of mixing going on until the veil just went, and said, okay, you're out of range now. You can't do that anymore. But we're all, a lot of us are carrying around those genetics. So that's another part of the picture of our spiritual evolution. And really, at this time and place, there's so much exorcising we're about to be exorcised.
Oh, exorcised, like the Exorcist.
Yeah, right. And I don't mean our heads are going to start spinning around or anything, but the point is that the energetic patterns that we have been infested with for various reasons, but we let it in the first place. We have to remember that, we are not entirely victims. We're not victims in this case, but it just kept happening at various ages and times and places. So we're having to be exorcised now, and it's a nasty experience. But we made our bed, and now we've got to go, ew, I don't want to lie in this bed any longer,
Somebody changed the sheets here. Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. First of all, I want to go back to what you just shared, the divine dispensation. This is fascinating to me because the lines from the autobiography of a yogi that I quoted are from the chapter on Kriya Yoga. And this million years that it takes for the soul to return to God, right? This is addressed in the book because Yogananda is telling us that Kriya Yoga, which is an ancient technique of working with the energies in the spine and drawing the consciousness back up to where it came from, to the thousand-petal lotus in the brain where divine consciousness in union with God can be experienced, that this is, and these are the exact words he uses, a divine dispensation. Those are the exact words.
Isn't that
those who study the Self-Realization Fellowship lessons, that is, it's like there is karma, right, which is the result of divine law, cause and effect. Kriya is from the root of karma, and it's cause and effect. And there is love. This is the grace that we're speaking of, where there is this descent of divinity into flesh. That's what an avatar is, in order to bring us this, like, okay, kids, we're giving you a divine shortcut, and there is this higher science, but it's a science of love. Yes, there's Kriya, and you magnetize the spine, and you do this inner work, and that's necessary, high scientific sacred discipline. And there has to be devotion. There has to be love for the divine. There has to be some kind of connection like that, because the law and the science are only part of the picture, and the devotion and grace are an absolutely necessary element of it. So that, particularly moving, touching to me when you used that phrase.
Yes. Well, and he spoke of that, used that word with individuals at times too, in their individual situation. For instance, with our dear colleague Bill. Bill had cancer many years before he actually passed. And the doctors at the time said, well, Bill, pack your things. You're checking out, in a few more months, it's not going to make it. And he, or months, they didn't say months, they said several years. And he was in that period of time, and through me said to him, no, Bill, you're going to be given a dispensation. And, it's up to you how you operate within that dispensation. You could blow it, and then the dispensation would kind of go bye-bye. Or you can, live it to its fullest with integrity, which of course Bill did. And he lived 25 years more or something. I'm just guessing, but something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm giving that as an example, but it's a grace thing is what it really is. And it doesn't mean that you're better than the neighbor that didn't make it. I don't know exactly why dispensations are given. Exactly. That's not clear to me, because, it seems so unfair. This little baby dies of something horrible, and then this older person maybe is just, lives through it, and you go, why did the baby have to die? It's like, so it's hard to understand why certain grace factors are given. And of course there's karma too. Yeah, I know, I'm not going to get into all of that because I don't understand it. But I don't believe it has anything to do with, oh, you're better than this person. Obviously not. That's not what it's about.
Well, as it happens, I do understand it, and I'll tell you.
Speak to me.
Yeah, it's a good thing I happen to be here. No, I'm kidding. I'm half kidding. But there is a specific incident in the New Testament, in the Gospel, where Christ heals. I don't recall whether it's a cripple or, a leper. I don't recall. But it says, "Take up thy bed and walk. Go and sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you."
Mm.
Right? So it's like, okay, give you divine dispensation. Now you've got free will again. So you got this because of what you did, and go and sin no more, that a worse thing, shall not come upon thee. And here in this little volumes back here, this is Yogananda's 2-volume commentary on the Gospels, the second coming of Christ, the resurrection of the Christ within you, which is one of the great scriptures of the world. And I was just reading this the other day, actually, where the science behind this is explained in detail. This is the wonderful thing about these books in particular, is that they were so meticulously prepared over decades. Yogananda passed in 1952, and his disciples, prepared these volumes very, very carefully over a period of decades before they were published. And so there are footnotes and references bringing all the latest, quantum science and, medicine and psychology and everything, and references from the Vedas and from the Bhagavad Gita, explaining in great detail both the physical and medical science and the high metaphysics that are what are healing about. And when you bring up this question, Maya, well, why did this person get some grace and dispensation and the other one didn't? Well, that soul suffering from that disease in that place and that time was in the path of the Christ as he happened to come to Bethesda that day, right? So that soul had a connection to Jesus, to the soul of Jesus in previous incarnations, such that, it just unfolded that way. I mean, that's where karma comes into play. And this brings back, I just want to touch on this, when you were talking about paragenetics and the Genetica. This is the high field. Mm-hmm. And then there's our human genetics, and that the Genetica comes down into the human genetic field. There is a flash in the ether when the sperm and the ovum unite, right? And many souls are drawn to this flash in the ether, desiring that body, desiring that incarnation. It's just like everything's a struggle. You had to fight to get this body, but you won, you triumphed over the other ones who wanted, because you were more perfectly aligned, in terms of your karma with that family, with that moment in time. So your soul descends into the genetics of that united sperm and ovum, of that man and woman. And then you bring in the creation of the fetus in the 9 months, the astral spine. That's the paragenetics. Your soul begins to, you have the blending of the human genetics and the karma that is locked up in your astral spine then begins to express itself in the formation of the human body that will be uniquely yours. So it's this combination of, yes, human genetics and our soul, Genetica coming in, and that this then interacts with the influences of the stars, the inner zodiac of the chakras, where our karma is embedded. And as the planets go through their lawful transits and passages, it activates this hidden karma locked in our inner spine, our astral spine, as circumstance allows. And again, this is all, from my years of, Yogananda's teachings, or my primary spiritual path. These truths exist in other traditions as well, but you can find the material I'm quoting in the chapter on Kriya Yoga, the science of Kriya Yoga, in the autobiography, and also the chapter on astrology of his guru, Sri Yukteswar. So anyway, I know that was kind of a lot to try to pack in.
Very interesting. As you were speaking, Thoth gave me the words of Jesus. Okay, I'm not channeling Jesus, but I received that. And this, I don't think this is in the Bible anywhere. I mean, I don't know, but he said, and Yeshua said, now this is what I'm, just getting from here. If I touch you, it is because you have first touched me. So
if I touch you, it is because you have first touched me.
Yeah. So it kind of wraps it up. I mean, don't you think? I mean, it feels like that's connects.
Yeah. That you have to exercise, not exorcise, exercise our own free will, right? To choose the guru, we've earned the opportunity. Our desire for a reunion with the divine over incarnations earns us this opportunity where, this channel of grace suddenly appears before you. And do you reach out? Do you exercise your free will to reach out for that divine grace? Is that your sense of what is
yes, it is. And ask and ye shall receive, and there are a lot of things you could play off of that, but I kind of liked what I just received, which was almost made it a little more intimate, a little more personal.
Yeah, I say it again, please.
If I touch you, it is because you have first touched me.
Ah, okay. That's beautiful. I'll have to remember that.
And one other thing I wanted to bring up here, it's not directly connected to what you're talking about here, but it is to our greater subject. And I have a whole article on it that I wrote, I don't know, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And called the reparations. The first reparation they called the Great Reparation. There were a few smaller ones after that. First, let us begin with when the Anunnaki were playing havoc with us. It reached a point where humanity was accepting this. Their little Anunnaki signs, Anunnaki 2020, you know, and so the good company of Horus is sometimes called in Egypt texts, said, okay, bye-bye, and they took off. And we're going, you left us here alone. Oh, how could you do this to us? Well, I went to Thoth about this. I said, why did you leave? I mean, my God, we have the Anunnaki on our doorstep and you take up and leave, you know, because they were among us at that time. He said, we didn't leave you. You left us. You know, energetically, vibrationally, we left them. So they said, well, we may as well get on our ships and go because they left us.
Right.
So,
it's almost as if energetically they can't even inhabit the same space as us and be with us when we have lowered our vibration. Is that it?
exactly. So they came back later. The first great reparation, the first one, I'm really bad at numbers. I really am, but I think it was about 16,000 years ago. I think. You'll have to read my article to find out for sure. And they came back and established some places where they were helping us with our genetics. The article gives a lot more information, but even so, it does not really fill you in on all the details by any means. I know they listed some of the places they returned to and established this. One was what is now known as Angkor Wat. Didn't have the buildings quite it has now, but you know, that was a location. And there was, I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. I can't remember right now. But anyway, they did do this for us. And then they had some smaller reparations. I think there were 2 more, much smaller, where they came back and did some more refinement on helping us with our genetic problem. So they didn't cure it because it's up to us to, you know, reach that level. But they did. That was a grace factor in a way. That was a dispensation in a way that they actually came back and did that for us.
Well, so
I'll put link to that.
Yeah, let's do that. So everybody look for the links. They will be below the video. So the grace factor, let's, talk about as a way of sort of wrapping things up. We are in a moment when grace is coming in. We're in this crisis. We are seeking to realign with our true time wave. And we're carrying both, these 2 streams within us, the Nephilim stream and, the Solarian Sun Lords stream that, are blended within all of us, along with, what you're calling fairy genetics from, long ago when those still within the Lotus reality were intermingling with us. So what can we do today, tomorrow, the next day? What choices do we make that will facilitate our reunion with the Ranna time wave, just as individuals who are out there listening to us?
Well, I wish I could give you a simple answer to that question, but from my side of the stream, I don't see a simple answer. But looking at it from the Thothic perspective, we are attempting right now to clean house from the the archonic investitures, that's what he calls it, that have been, creating these barnacles on our bow, just creating all these barnacles of heavy, rotting, sugar that we love sugar, right? But what happens when we take it in? It rots in our gut. I'm sorry to get ucky here.
Oh, it's very picturesque. We're getting it. Yeah.
This is what's going on. We're having an extreme, what do they call that? Oh gosh, my words are failing me here. When you get too much sugar in your body, you get something. I can't think of the name of it now. But anyway, when you get full of all candida.
Candida.
It's like major candida. And what does candida do? It just saturates your body with this toxin, or makes your body create toxin. And it actually affects your mind, your brain. And it's easy to get, just sort of in candida world, and you just can't seem to get out of that to get out to reality if you have it really bad, So I'm equating it to disease because it really is a form of disease. So what we're attempting to do right now is purify the system, get rid of our addiction to the sugar that the archons have been feeding us. The archonic Thoth doesn't like me to say archons. Archonic cloud has been feeding us through many ways, but mainly human beings who have been so archonically saturated, they are become what Thoth called invested in that archonic influence. And so that whole miasm is like a toxin that seduces. Now, not everyone is being seduced in the same way. And many of us who feel like we're clear from that seduction are really being seduced by the fear of it and by the dread fascination of it. Like, oh, my arm is beginning to fall off. Isn't that fascinating? It's like there's this fascination with it. So we're all having to be challenged in this way, some of us more than others. But what's really happening here is that it's up to us to say, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid anymore. And that's not about, individual stuff. It's about the bigger illusion that's being created around what we feel, what we think. Oh, these people really love conspiracies. Okay, we'll create these marvelous conspiracies, pure BS, but we'll put them inside it. We'll put a lot of this really true stuff, really true conspiracies, and we'll mix it all together and we'll serve it as a nice sugar cookie. So
yeah,
all of this is going on. You cannot figure it out with your head. You've got to take it into your being and say, I am not going to consume any more of this addictive element. I'm going to, that doesn't mean that you have to close your eyes and ears to what's going on. You have to be aware, but just don't consume it as a means to survive, because you can't survive on the sugar cookies.
Yeah, it's so true. And whether or not it's a specific program of seduction by the archonic cloud, certainly it's a disinformation strategy, that is used by the corrupt elite, call them the old order or the rainbows, the Cabal, the Illuminati, call them what you will, or just an ordinary counterintelligence tactic strategy program that's used by multiple intelligence agencies around the world. This is exactly what it is, which is damaging revelations are exposing our agenda. We need to have people not believe this stuff anymore. We need to discredit it. So let's take these damaging revelations of genuine conspiracies and mix it in with all kinds of, seductive, fascinating BS conspiracies. JFK Jr. is alive, God bless him. I wish he were. He's alive in spirit, but he ain't, I mean, there were
Supposed to come
credible
back in
folks out there.
October.
There were credible folks out there, folks I've been interviewed by, who said October 17th, 2020, JFK Jr. is going to make his appearance, make his revelation. Pence will be dropped in favor of JFK Jr. as the running mate, and the ticket of Trump Kennedy will sweep before the world, and and the kids will be saved, and the currency will be revalued, and the world will be, it's like, and I'm
Yeah,
reading this, and like, I love that story. JFK Jr., boy, that's a great story. He's actually Q, right? Great story. And I remember when it came out, I thought, man, whoever came up with that, going the daily briefing, right? Okay, what's our disinformation? And you guys have been working for a week. What do you got? You got any, new stories to feed the suckers out there? It's like, oh, you gotta love this, boss. JFK Jr. is alive, and he's gonna replace Pence on the ticket in October. Oh, okay. Start the memes. Start the, okay, we need to come up with somebody who sort of looks like him. We'll Photoshop him into some of Trump's appearances, and we'll just get this thing rolling.
but
And meanwhile, the true stuff, the pedophilia rings, the blackmailing rings, the Epstein reality, the central banking families, the whole history, on and back. That all gets lost in this wave of fascinating BS, and people would just love for it to be true. Come up with something and people would love for it to be true, and just feed us them. Oh, here's some more poison sugar. This is good.
Will Rogers, who I adore, and I used to, when I was younger, way younger, in my 20s and whatever, read every book I could get my hands on Will Rogers. I must have known him in a past life or something. But anyway, he said, let's see, how did he put it now? Human beings are kind of like monkeys in a cage. Throw anything in there and they'll give you serious consideration.
It's funny because I've actually visited the burned out Hulk, the burned out remnant of his cabin, his log cabin down in a canyon in LA.
Not his house.
No, it's cabin. He had a hunting cabin or something.
Right.
I knew the Palisades. It's in a canyon back in there. There's just the chimney remaining. But yeah, he was. What was it? Maybe he said this. I just heard it, and somebody was comparing, like fighting with Trump. It's like wrestling. This is why you don't want to wrestle with a pig, because you get dirty, and the pig gets, both get filthy, and the pig enjoys it.
That I think that is a
the pig. That's another one. Well, so this, what we're talking about here, in terms of, okay, how do we stay out of the archonic cloud? How do we resist the seduction? How do we resist the fascination with the dark stuff? How do we stay in embodying the solution, living the solution?
Yeah, I have to finish answering your question. I have just one more thing to say here, because Thoth is on my shoulder about it. He says, embrace what has been given to you by the mandate of Lord Michael. And you don't have to know, okay, let's see, what was that? You don't have to look it up. It's like, embrace that you have been given, every individual on the planet and as a whole, a doctrine of signature of release from the archonic investiture. And it's not a formula. It's not something you have to chant or even meditate upon, although certainly meditating on the higher essence of the violet flame and all of that, that's powerful. The violet flame is a powerful product, but the point is, say, yes, I recognize that there is some kind of a grace factor, I'm calling it Thoth is calling it mandate of the violet flame, call it what you want, that is present in this field. You can call it, the angels are singing from the planet. You can say whatever you want. It's there, and you can keep remembering that and bring it into your experience. Say, I am not going to sink with this ship, nor are any of the comrades of light going to sink with this ship. We are embracing the raft of light, the Merkaba of light, being given to us by the man, what I'm calling, what Thoth is calling the mandate of the violet flame. Call it what you will, but say, I'm not going down with this ship. That's not my choice. And if I'm not going down, I'm not going to be an every man for himself person. I'm a being of light. So I'm going to embrace everybody I can possibly embrace and say, come on, let's do this together.
Yeah. Yeah, this is so good to hear because it's just so easy to despair these days, because things look so grim. And to embrace the gift of the mandate of Lord Michael, to say yes to it, that's about tearing ourselves free, shaking off this darkness and this bleak consciousness and receiving the light and embracing it. It reminds me of there's a Christopher Marlowe play, contemporary of Shakespeare, Dr. Faustus. Famously, Faustus sold his soul to the devil in exchange for ultimate knowledge and power, such as he could attain in one lifetime. And, says, oh, and then he's got Mephistopheles sort of hanging out with him, showing him cool stuff. Oh, show me Helen of Troy. Oh, it's great. But then comes the hour of reckoning. His life, it's like, okay, now we're going to take your soul to Hades now. And so at the very end of the play, Dr. Faustus, who has, enjoyed all this great brilliance and his fame and his, the power and knowledge that he sold his soul for, suddenly is that there is 1 hour left. He has 1 hour left before the devils will come and take his soul. And there's this amazing soliloquy he gives. He says, Faustus, now hast thou but 1 bare hour to live, and then thou must be damned perpetually. Right? But this is pride. He doesn't have to be damned perpetually. We don't have to be damned perpetually. There's grace. There's Christ. There's the Archangel Michael. There's this whole divine dispensation. It's flowing into us. All we have to do is say yes. And we can say that to Mephistopheles and Hades and all the rest of it. The grace of Christ, of Lord Michael, is more powerful. It is from God. In fact, there's a line later in the same speech when Faustus says he has this vision. He's terrified of being damned any moment, but he has this vision. It says, see where Christ's blood streams in the firmament. Half a drop would save my soul. Half a drop, my Christ, and then Mephistopheles tugs him and says, rend not my soul for naming of my Christ, yet will I call on him. So that's where we are. That's where we are. Call. All we have to do is call.
Yeah, exactly.
Say yes.
And also, reach out and care. Of course, everyone watching this does, but it needs to be stated. Reach out and really care and have compassion for those who are not right now able to see past the veil of illusion, because they're so new and they're crying out to be heard. And this is the only way to know how to be heard.
And I would add to that just one little thought, which is that there's this fine line of discrimination and intuition about those we can help, those who are receptive, those who are asking for us to help them, such as we can while we are asking for divine help for ourselves. And there are those who are not in a place to hear us, are not in a place of receptivity, who are in the lower vibration. And environment is stronger than will. And if we spend too much time trying to rescue and pull up those who are not willing, are not receptive, do not want to listen, and are in this lower vibration, we can get pulled down. So find your tribe, help each other, and say yes.
Say yes to the Merkaba of light.
Amen. And to Lord Michael. And
my last little statement here before we wind down. Okay, I'm so terrible with names, but the first name of this man is Lars. That helps a lot, I know, but that's the only name I can remember. And he's an older man, and I've been watching his videos, a few of them. And one, he goes into, climbs, you watch him climbing it, which is really dramatic because he's just a regular guy and he's not that young, climbing up to go into the cave, the Qumran cave where the original scrolls were found and everything, you know. And it's especially touching for me because physically, I was physically on Masada and looked down over to where the Qumran caves were. We wanted to go there, but there was no time, long story, so we didn't get to go there. But I was physically looking at that point and seeing the sea that was the Dead Sea out, beyond that. So anyway, Lars is climbing up to the cave, and he and his cameraman are in there all that's the setting for the setting sun. He stays there all night. He's doing chanting and all this. You don't see all of that on the video, of course, but you see a certain amount of it. And he tells about, well, when the sun comes up again, oh my God, he shows it. The sun just comes right through that portal. It's just the most exquisitely beautiful thing into this little humble cave that becomes this sanctuary of light. It is so incredible, and you feel it, And so he's telling the story of how the Essenes viewed what they would have done. The real Essenes, when they were up there, they would have gone into these deep meditations for like weeks at a time, weeks, with only water and dates to supply them. And they would have gone through this, deep chanting meditative process until as they put it, they were received by Yeshua. Well, this is before he was born, but by the being that they knew was going to come as Yeshua. They were received by this Christic being in his, how do they put it, in his chariot of light, Merkaba. That's the way Lars put it. And I'm presuming he's echoing the translation of what they wrote. Well, that really blew me away because Thoth, and he didn't say it much now, but in the 80s, like, was all the time was talking about his Merkaba of souls that supported his energy to be able to do what he does in this frame of reality. And I didn't understand it all, but they're a support team, and he called him his chariot of the sun, his chariot of the sun Merkaba. So, I felt that connection there. So to bring it back to concluding what we're talking about, I just felt the presence of, if we all just spent 5 minutes a day, maybe at night before we go to sleep, that's a magical time, just saying, calling upon Yeshua's chariot of light Merkaba, his support team, the chariot of light that embraced the Christic being that eventually did incarnate as Yeshua, and feel ourselves in that little cave, that cave, it's a cave, but that they made, the artificial cave, and feel that chariot of light coming toward us and taking us aboard. Swing low, sweet chariot,
Yeah. Coming for to carry me home, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just one thing that, came into my experience recently that I wanted to share with you that inspired me, and I'm working with that. And of course, Thoth has been really wanting me to do that, to go into I am. I'm not familiar with the whole I am doctrine text and stuff, but he's asking me to, for my own personal healing, kind of been challenging lately, to go into the, to the I am experience. I am light, I am love, I am that I am whatever you want to put into it to relegate it to your personal experience of being the I am frequency, because the I am frequency is the logos of light that created our divine spectrum that we live in, that we came out of, that we are part of. From the Thothic perspective, I don't know what the written material says about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you brought that in here, at the end of our sharing today. Yeah, that's it. So thank you, everyone, for being with us. And so I'll just mention again, our work here is greatly helped by any donations that you can give. The link for donations is right below. Reverend Maia gives beautiful counseling sessions and Akashic translation sessions for people who are interested. That link is also there. And please like and subscribe and share. And bless you. Thank you for being with us. God blesses everyone. And
Yes.
we'll see you next time, folks. Bye for now.